Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Adjunct Teachers and Animal Law webinar. We have a great panel for you today, but before we get into today's discussion, I'll just give a brief introduction to myself for those of you who may not know me. My name is Hannah Nabolsi, and I am a 3L at George Washington University Law School, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Before we get into the panelist introductions, I do just like to give a brief overview of this webinar series for anyone who may be new and joining us for the first time. So the Animal Law program at GW Law School has established the Animal Legal Education Initiative, which strives to incorporate animal law as a standalone discipline within the Legal Academy. And this webinar series is intended to support adjunct professors across the country. And we do that by creating opportunities to connect and to collaborate with each other. We also hope to provide you all with academic resources and support that can help you accomplish your goals within your own institutions. And we say this every time, but we truly mean it, that these webinars are intended to be conversational and a place for networking. So to that end, please do feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat. You can also unmute yourself if you have a question at any point, but I'll also save some time at the end for questions if you'd like to wait until then. We also encourage you all to turn on your video if you're able and comfortable doing so, as it's always great to be able to put names to faces. Finally, I want to mention that if you missed any of our previous webinars, the recordings of those are up on the GW Law website, so please do feel free to check those out. Today's event is also being recorded and it will be made available on the website as well. So if you'd like to reference back to today's discussion, it'll be there for you to do so, and you can also share it with anyone in your network that you think might be interested in watching it. And the final thing I'll mention is that we have our next webinar scheduled on March 12th at 6 p.m. Eastern, and that webinar will be addressing the topic of incorporating and managing AI in the classroom. And now moving on to today's webinar, we will be discussing syllabus and classroom policies, and we have a wonderful panel today, so I would like to turn it over to them so they can give brief introductions. And why don't we go ahead and start with Professor Gambert?
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I see some familiar faces, so it's nice to see those of you that I know and great to see those of you that I don't know. My name is Iselin Gambert, and I'm a professor at the George Washington University Law School. I'm the director of the Fundamentals of Lawyering program, and I'm the faculty co-director of the Animal Legal Education Initiative, and Kathy Hessler is the director and dean of our animal law program. So I work closely with Kathy and with Professor Joan Schaffner. I teach in the first year curriculum a course called Fundamentals of Lawyering. And I have a lot of experience with syllabus and sort of classroom teaching design in that course. And I also have taught upper level courses in feminist legal theory and a seminar that I designed that I'm currently teaching called Gender, Race, and Species. So that's the animal related course that I'm teaching currently. And I've also co-taught a master's level course in critical animal studies at Lund University in Sweden. So I'm really happy to talk with all of you and have a lot of experience designing courses and syllabi and everything related to classroom dynamics. So I'm eager for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Leugman?
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everyone, for attending tonight. I'm Josh Leugman. I'm a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice, and I'll start by saying that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Department of Justice or the United States tonight, and the views I express do not necessarily represent the Department of Justice or the United States. But I'm here because I also teach a course called Crimes Against Animals. It's a litigation style course that I developed with the assistance of Dean Hessler and Professor Schaffner at George Washington University Law School.
Thank you. And last but not least, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Hibshush. I'm a 3L at GW Law, graduating this spring. I've had the wonderful opportunity to be involved with GW Law's animal law program since I was a 1L as a research assistant for Dean Hessler, taking various classes, including our animal law seminar, hot topics in animal law, wildlife and ecosystems law. As a 2L, I was president of the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund chapter at GW, and I'm now the secretary for SOLDIF. So happy to provide the student perspective on this panel.
Well, thank you all for those introductions. You all have a great level of expertise, and I'm excited to get into our discussion today. So I'd like to start by talking about some of the classroom policies that professors typically include in their syllabi. And the first classroom policy I want to start with is attendance. As a student, I've seen policies that range anywhere from you can only miss 1 to 2 classes to the only policy being that you have to attend the final exam. Everything else is a free-for-all. So my first question on this topic is, what is your attendance policy and how do you create it?
I can respond to that. So GW Law actually has an attendance policy, and you can require more attendance than that, but you're not allowed to require less. So the first tip that I have is find out whether or not the university or law school where you're going to be teaching has a policy that binds you, because it might be something that you don't have any discretion over. You know, we can make our attendance policy more strict, but you might not be able to. So the ABA, the American Bar Association, also has guidance. It's kind of open to some interpretation that students have to attend class regularly, and it's kind of up to interpretation what that means. But most law schools have an attendance policy where students have to attend at least 80% of the class sessions. Some go as high as 85 or 75, but we have 80% as our articulated requirement. And so I have stuck with that. There's lots of exceptions for, you know, maybe if a person needs a long-term absence because of a severe illness or something, and that's a very case-by-case scenario. But my guess is that if you're teaching in the United States, most of your law schools that you're going to teach at are going to have something at around that range as an articulated attendance policy.
Thank you. So you mentioned there can be some special circumstances that may inhibit a student's ability to come to class if it is, say, 80% of the time. Can you talk about how you address some of those special circumstances, whether it be a medical emergency or a family emergency?
Sure. I mean, Josh, do you want to jump in? I don't want to be the only one talking. I'm happy to answer this question, but happy for you to as well.
You are welcome to continue talking on this. I don't have much to add. I would say that so far that's not an issue that I've encountered, which I'm quite pleased about. I think the subject area of my class and a lot of these courses in general sort of requires extensive discussion and conversation between the students. So it's not just what is being learned outside the classroom, but a lot is coming from the classroom dynamic as well. So attendance is a key part of that. I would say, you know, it would be case specific. So again, I don't have experience with needing to address that, but it would be contingent upon.
I have a lot of experience with it. So I can say that these are based on norms that are going to be, I think, like culturally specific. And if you're teaching at a law school in the United States, there's going to be most likely a norm that most students will attend almost every class. And of course, there could be exceptions. And I have not obviously taught at every law school in the country, but I think in the United States in law schools, attendance usually is not something that professors have a big challenge with because of this ABA requirement. And because I think US-based law students typically, you know, law school is really expensive. And there's, I think a lot of people are typically taking animal-based classes as electives and they want to be there. And so they're going to be excited to attend and want to attend. And Hannah, to your question, I have only really faced attendance challenges teaching in the US with people that have personal circumstances that's preventing them from coming. So it's not that they are skipping class because they're, you know, would rather be doing something else and they kind of can't be bothered. It really is more of a personal circumstance, an illness or a personal crisis. And in those situations, I try to be as supportive as I can because I know that they would rather be in class, right, than dealing with their personal emergency. And then I really try to take an approach of being as supportive as I can. Law school is a very stressful space. We all know this. And my goal is to be one of the people in my students' support team so that they see me as someone that they can come to and be vulnerable with and reveal whatever their circumstances are if they're comfortable doing so, so that I can try to help connect them to the person or entity that can support them, whether it's the counseling center, the dean of students, maybe they need to go to the Title IX office. There's lots of different offices at every law school or university that can support a student in a particular crisis, whether it's health or personal safety, a domestic violence situation, a family circumstance. And if they are running into an issue where attendance might, be at risk of hitting that 80%, I will be talking to them well in advance of them hitting that number so that we can try to troubleshoot. Does that mean I'm going to need to work with them one-on-one to sort of create like a bespoke, one-off class for them, maybe once or twice, just so I can get them to that 80%. So that's very rare that that happens. I don't know how many people are watching this webinar that might teach at the university level instead of the law school level, to undergrads, or teach in other countries than the United States. But in my experience teaching abroad in Europe, attendance has been more spotty. I don't want to generalize an entire continent, but in the school that I taught at overseas, there was less of a norm than I've seen in the US of every student attending every class all the time. And there was just more of a norm of, maybe 70% of the students would come, but many would miss. And I think there it was important to really cultivate in my class policies and in my first class that I taught a real sense of why this course is so important, to Josh's point that these are interactive classes. They're not just lecture based. And it's important to create a sense of community, I think, early on, both in your syllabus, in your sort of framing documents about the class, and in that first class. I think that might inspire students to actually show up. I had a student at the university I taught at overseas tell me that my class was the only class that she attended every class for. And it was because my classes were interactive. And for her other classes, they were lecture. And so you sat in the back of a room with 50 people and you could be silent the whole time. And she felt like, I'll just watch the recording or I'll just do the reading. But because I was constantly putting people into small groups and doing exercises, she had a reason to attend. So that was really exciting for me to see that. I think, to Josh's point, when you create a classroom dynamic that really depends on the students being engaged, your attendance is likely to be higher, unless the norm is already for it to be high at your school.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. And it's really nice to have that comparison between US-based schools and international schools. So thank you for sharing all of your insight. And related to the topic of special circumstances, I can imagine that offering class recordings can be especially helpful if a student, for example, is maybe dealing with an illness and they're not able to come to class for a couple of weeks. So how do you determine if your classes should be recorded and made available either to students at large or to students on special circumstances? And Michelle, from the student perspective, you maybe can add a little bit of insight as to whether recordings are even helpful at all.
I just want to recognize that there's a question. I don't know if we're taking those as they happen or later.
Oh, yep, there it is. Daria, you can go ahead and ask your question. We can come back to mine in a minute.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it because it actually has to do or deal with what was just spoken upon. I'm speaking on behalf of students that have chronic illnesses, and sometimes you don't know how many classes you might have to miss, but because of the ABA's requirements, you are given a number like 80% of classes that you need to attend. But as somebody with multiple chronic illnesses, I don't know when my flare-ups are going to happen, and I can't gauge how often it's going to happen. And for me and other students like me that I've spoken with, it's a cause of stress because we don't know what our health is going to be like a given semester, a given week, a given day. And when we are confined to, say, missing 4 classes, or if a professor chooses to make it even more strict, 3 classes, it almost incites a flare-up because you're so nervous about having a flare-up that your stress makes your body go into panic mode. And there have been times where I've come down to the last week of class and it's like, if I get sick this week, I'm done for and I'm failing this class. And it's not within my control. And oftentimes I've been met with being asked if I've reached out to the admissions office or made them aware, or have I considered taking time off. But when you have a chronic illness, you can't put your life on hold. If I put my life on hold, I would never get a JD because I would constantly just be planning my life around a chronic illness. So I would like to say that sometimes it is stressful and we try to do our best, and it's not that students don't want to come to class. We're paying a lot of money to be here. I have studied on the international level and within the US, and I've gone to all my classes given that my health is in check. Some professors are understanding, other ones kind of stick within school guidelines, but I just kind of wanted to note that as a student, there are some students who really want to be there, but given the cards they've been dealt, they do the best they can, but they still have that fear of, if I have 5 days I have to be out versus the 4, I'll fail a class entirely, even if it's within the last week of the class, if that makes any sense. It's just something I've dealt with for the last 4 years, and it's been such a cause of stress that I really wanted to raise that issue on behalf of students like me.
I just want to thank you for bringing that up. And as somebody that also has a number of chronic health challenges, I totally understand. I understand the challenge. And it's something, also when you have to teach a class, when you're having, it's very difficult. Like, do you have to reschedule a class because you're having like a flare of your chronic illness? So it's very, how do you know how often you should be rescheduling a class? So that's something I want to just frame for everyone in this webinar, that it's very real, that both students and educators might be navigating. And it's just really hard. And I know, like, as somebody that's just been sick for many, like, months and years at a time in different ways and at different levels of severity, it is just really challenging to show up always and like be on and present and, sort of in the spotlight as an educator in the teacher's role. And to your point, Daria, 99 times out of 100, if a student misses class, it's not because they are having, going out and having a field day and having some fun other thing. It's because they wish they were in class and they're not able to. So I think, to your point, what you just said, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head, which is that not every educator is going to take the same approach. In my experience, I've never had in my entire career, I've been teaching since 2009, any student that hasn't met the guidelines. I've never had a student not meet the attendance requirements. Part of that is because students have a lot of pressure to make it work even if they are sick, and I hate that for them. But part of it is because I have gotten creative with students to help them find ways to meet the attendance requirement. And like I said, sometimes that's because I'll meet with them outside of class on a day when they are feeling well, and I might count that as a class attendance. So there could be creative ways that you can make sure that the student is meeting the ABA requirement of like contact hours, if you will, even if you need to be creative about how they achieve that. If they're navigating a chronic illness, or frankly, any other personal life circumstance where they're really navigating something really difficult that's keeping them out of the classroom. As somebody that, I try to like figure out how much power I have as an educator, and, I have to work within the framework of the ABA that is like governing me as a law professor. And I think, okay, within this framework, how do I leverage also the power that I have within my little tiny space of power, which is my classroom? And how do I support students within that as much as I can? So I think that's something all of us that are designing classes should think a little bit about, of how do we flex as much power as we have to be as supportive as we can, without pressing up against concerns, that might come from the dean's office of, oh, I heard none of your students ever come to any classes, right? That would be like a line too far, and none of us, I don't think, would ever cross that line. I certainly haven't. But thanks for bringing that up. And I don't know if it looks like maybe you have a response.
Yes, thank you so much for acknowledging that, because as a student with friends in similar situations, I know what it's like to take class or do assignments from the emergency room and having no sympathy, and having to attend class the next day, regardless of how late you were in the hospital. And basically just taking it as part of your life and having to deal with that and feeling very alone. And so having that recognition, I think, is a huge deal to students who really want to be there, but because of their circumstances cannot be. So thank you so much for acknowledging that.
It's an important perspective. I mean, it's something I've actually written about in one of the articles that I wrote during COVID, which is just navigating being both a student, but also an educator, at the same time as navigating a lot of societal crisis, trauma, maybe personal long-term health challenges, chronic health challenges. It's something that I don't think legal education has a lot of, there's not enough, I don't think, thought placed on this, but it's only going to increase as we recognize people's 300, like, sort of holistic, like, people's lives are three-dimensional and bigger than just their life as a student or a teacher. So I think that you're raising a really critical issue that all of us need to think about when we're designing our classes.
Yes, thank you, Daria, for that thoughtful question, and Professor Gambert for that very comprehensive and insightful response. I agree that this is a very important topic, and I'm really happy that we were at least able to start the conversation a little bit here, and have a space to discuss this. I will go ahead and pick up with the question that I left off with, which was regarding recordings and how you determine whether or not to make those available to your students, and if they seem to be useful for students.
Yeah, I'm happy to go to Josh and Michelle. I have experienced both recording classes for everyone, recording nothing for nobody ever, and then doing it on a case by case. So I'm happy to speak to all of that, but would love to hear from the other speakers too.
So I'll speak a bit from the instructor side. I record my classes. I find them beneficial for me, so I imagine that students find them beneficial as well. I haven't really received student feedback on that, but these classes, because they're largely discussion based, move very quickly. Everything's kind of in fast forward. We have a lot of content to digest in a very short amount of time, and sometimes going back to build on that for the next week's course or the week after that, or whatever point further down the semester, it can be helpful to go back and look at those recordings. So for me, I'm all in on recordings, partly again from my own perspective. And I had a professor when I was in law school who had this odd photographic memory where he would cold call you, at the start of the semester, and would somehow remember 10 weeks down the line what you said, and I think this was before class recordings, would remember exactly who it was who said what, and would speak back to that, and then bring it up in the case that was currently before you. That's not something that I can do, but that is something I can do with the benefit of video recording. So it's very useful to me, and again, I would imagine it would be very useful for students. Obviously, Michelle can speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, I echo what Professor Lloydman said. Recordings are really, really helpful to students. And, to go off what Professor Gambert's saying with this model of you can record everything, you can record nothing, you can record only in special circumstances, I really do think recording everything is the way to go. If you go of only recording in special circumstances, you have students who might miss class for a legitimate reason, but one that might not be covered by a school's formal policy, and then they're unable to access that recording, even though maybe they missed class for a reason that wasn't their fault. Maybe they missed class because they were going to a job interview or something that's really important to their career. but isn't covered by formal policy. So having the blanket recording policy and allowing students to come back and watch the recording later so they can make up any class time they missed is super helpful. And I've taken advantage of that myself in those types of circumstances. And I think it's not so much of a worry in animal law classes with students saying, oh, let me just skip class and I'll watch the recording later. Because I think, as Professor Gambert said, students are taking these classes because they want to be in these classes. They're interested in animal law. So they're not incentivized to skip class or not attend or avoid the discussion. It's really just a better tool for us on the student side to be able to not be stressed and realize that if something comes up and we can't attend a class, we can always watch the recording later.
I'll just, I think my perspective is largely similar, but with some differences. So I teach a required first year course that is graded on a curve. I record as a default every class, make it available to every student. You never need to ask, you can watch it a million times. And I feel really strongly that that's the right thing to do for the reasons you've just heard. I also teach this upper level seminar called Gender, Race, and Species, and I recorded it for the first couple of years that I taught it. And this is a class, unlike maybe a class that's very doctrinal, where you're teaching doctrinal concepts in animal law or something. This is a class where there's a lot of extremely sensitive conversations about difficult material that is very, could be seen as provocative. We're talking about very hot button issues. A lot of people are bringing in significant personal experiences and layering them on top of our readings and talking about how their experience within their lived experience as it pertains to race or gender and other life experiences, how that has impacted them. It's a very personal class. And so over the last few years, I've actually moved away from recording it. And the model of the class I'm teaching now is actually ungraded. It's called a reading group. It used to be a seminar that was graded. And when I moved it to an ungraded reading group, I really felt comfortable telling my students, in order to facilitate as safe a space and as vulnerable a space as possible for these conversations, I'm not recording this, because we might say things inartfully. We might say something that, misinterpreted or, is taken out of, a context of goodwill, might feel like it might have offended another student, but really we were just struggling to articulate something in a careful way. And I've just seen people relax and really feel able to be more vulnerable. And when we're not recording, I would not make that same decision if I was teaching a class like Animal Law 101. So I just the reason I'm giving this as an example is, think about the kind of class you're teaching. Is it graded or not? Is it on a curve or not? How many students are in it? What kind of subject matter are you discussing? How sensitive is that subject matter? How much of the students' personal lives are going to be brought into the classroom? How vulnerable do they need to be? That might inform your classroom recording policy. Maybe you record everything all the time except one or two sessions that are going to be particularly vulnerable, and you decide not to make those available. So just food for thought, because people watching this might be teaching a really wide range of different kinds of classes.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to turn now to talk about a classroom policy that's related to attendance, and that is participation. As you mentioned, Professor Gambert, many law school classes are interactive, and so student participation is really valuable and appreciated. So my question is, does participation factor into your students' final grade? And if it does, how do you determine how much of the grade should be proportioned to participation?
Josh, do you want to go to this?
Sure. So the nature of my class, again, it's a litigation-focused class. It doesn't work without participation. Participation is not its own grade, but is a plus minus, so you can get a step up or down in your grade based on your participation or lack thereof. But the expectation is that you will participate in the course. Obviously, that means different things for different students. So I take that into account. And again, you don't have to be the #1 contributor in class or the one who always raises their hand first to speak to satisfy the expectation that you're participating. But the expectation is that every student participates. And again, there's no official grade for it, just the optional up or down step on my grading system.
So for me, it depends on whether my class is graded or not. My current version of my reading group, it's not graded, so neither is participation because none of it's graded. But when I have taught a version of my class that is graded, I have a significant part of the grade is participation, like as much as I'm able to give. If, ask your school if there's limits on it, but it might be like 20% or something like that. And I don't know if I'm allowed to share my screen. I would love to share my screen, but I'm not allowed to. Let's see, maybe now I'm allowed to. I just briefly want to share the text of my syllabus for my reading group. And this talks about how I'm really trying to create a culture that is grounded in the expectation of being of engaging. So you see that I'm trying to create an environment where you're empowered to take ownership over your own learning. This class is highly interactive. The success depends on the willingness of everyone to come to class prepared to engage deeply. I expect you to be, I say I don't cold call. If you don't want to participate on a particular day, please come anyway. And then I have a paragraph here that talks about how some of the things we talk about might be particularly challenging. They might be things that might make you uncomfortable. And I talk about how I'm hoping that people come with a sense of respect. And this is an important part of my pedagogical approach to teaching. This last sentence, know that you reserve the right to be uncertain, to say, I don't know, and to change your mind. That's really important to me to actually put in writing in my syllabus. And I'm happy to share my syllabus with anyone that wants it. But I want students to come to class realizing that they don't have to sound smart and they don't have to know the answer. All I want them to do is be curious. And curiosity is like a baseline requirement for me in the classroom. And I'm trying to set that up even in my syllabus in the written document. And I really try to model that. I say I don't know a lot as a teacher, and I think that helps people understand, like, we're talking about really complicated stuff. I don't know what the answer is, and neither do you, but let's tease it out and let's think it through. Another thing I'll do with my reading group that I love doing is I try not to be the only person running the class. So I have facilitators every week that sit at the front of the class with me. I sit on the side and they run the class with me. So everyone in the class, it's like 20 people, is participating, but those people are responsible for really taking even more ownership over framing questions, getting the conversation to go even deeper. So it kind of flattens the hierarchy just a little bit in the classroom. So it's not just the professor speaking to all of her students, but it's a bunch of students speaking to the rest of the students, taking a little bit of a leadership role. And I've really seen people step up the sophistication of their engagement. Of course, when they're the ones sitting at the front of the room, but even when I feel like they sort of sit up a little straighter and really take it seriously when they're in a conversation led by one of their colleagues, it's really exciting to see students take ownership over their own learning in that way. So I try to do that even within the classroom design, by putting people at the front of the room with me.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like you work very hard to meet students where they are and make the classroom as comfortable as possible. And so to that end, obviously there are different learning styles that students may have, and some students may be a little bit more shy in the classroom, maybe a little shy to share their opinions or speak up. So are there other opportunities you provide for participation points outside of classroom discussion? And Professor Leugman, I know that your class was a litigation-based skills class, but if you were to do it again, do you think that there are any sort of other participation opportunities that you could provide in your class?
So mine is going to be very specific to the structure of my course. The way my course is styled is a lot of your grade, or almost pretty much all of your grade, is based on doing trial advocacy style exercises over the course of the semester using an animal cruelty case. So there's a witness examination, voir dire, and a closing argument. That in and of itself is going to provide a lot of participation opportunities. I don't know that offering something, just the style of the course wouldn't really permit, I think, offering an alternative way of satisfying the participation requirement, but there are other things beyond the classroom discussion, namely the exercises, that will give you those same opportunities. So your commitment to those exercises, preparing for and performing in those exercises is another opportunity. So if you're a little shy and less likely to contribute to the classroom discussion, you can still demonstrate your commitment to the course and commitment to really taking what you're supposed to be learning and taking out of the course in those exercises, which are the graded part of the course. I would also add, though, that I think there are ways to make students who might be a little shyer feel comfortable about expressing their opinions and contributing to the conversation in ways that maybe make it a little less intimidating for them. Again, because my course, I'm being very specific to the litigation style of my course, but this is something that you also have to do with potential jurors in voir dire, right? In order to determine whether this is someone you want to sit in your trial, you're going to have to hash out, how they feel about different things, about the role of the prosecutor and defense attorney in criminal justice, or in a criminal case, what they think of an animal cruelty case, or whatever kind of case you're prosecuting or defending. So you have to do those kinds of things, and I style my course a little bit like a voir dire conversation. So figuring out how, and this is going to be dependent on each student, but figuring out how to get ideas out of that student and make them feel comfortable in a way that's also letting them know they're not being challenged. They might be being intellectually challenged, but it's not that their idea is being challenged such that they should feel shy about expressing their ideas, is another way of getting them to contribute to the conversation, and I think is an important part of making sure everybody gets the opportunity to participate, because you also don't want to have someone who has great ideas or a great ability to contribute to the conversation, but might just not be the quietest one in the group. So it's also identifying ways to get them to contribute for that purpose as well.
I echo everything that you said. As somebody who myself does not relish public speaking, even though I do it a lot as an educator, I really can empathize with students who it might be a simple thing of just not liking public speaking or not feeling comfortable, and it could be something where they have, a really extreme like sort of social anxiety or other like roadblock that they're navigating that might prevent them from participating in as fulsome of a way as I might like. And so I try to create a classroom dynamic that offers a bunch of different opportunities for students to participate. So one is participate at the level of the whole class. And like I showed you, I don't cold call. So what I like to say is, I'd love to hear from people who haven't spoken yet today, or I'd love to hear from people who haven't spoken yet this week, if we meet multiple times a week, or who haven't spoken in a few weeks. So I like giving little nudges and not calling on the same person that always raises their hand first. I will call on that person eventually, and I thank them for their willingness to participate. But I don't want, sometimes I've been told by students who come meet with me one-on-one, they say, I just, other people are happier to talk, and I would rather let those people talk because it makes me really uncomfortable. And I've sometimes said to students, what can I do, if anything, to help push you enough out of your comfort? Like, sort of, what can I do to get you to sort of feel like you can participate if you're not inclined to raise your hand and offer something when I ask for volunteers? And I've had more than one student over the years, like I've had over a dozen over the years, say to me, can you, just call on me? And I'm like, well, I don't like calling on people. And they say, but I'm asking you to, because it will actually nudge me. It'll force me to do it. I'm not going to raise my hand. So I have like a little list of people. And if they, at their request, want me to call on them, I'll say like, oh, Jane, do you have any thoughts about this? So I won't, sort of do it in a stressful way. And she could always say like, actually, no, not at this time or something. But so I ask the person in a one-on-one, how can I help you participate more? And I'll brainstorm ways with them. And that's one idea. I also like doing small group activity. A lot of people that feel that it's really difficult to speak at the level of a whole class will feel comfortable in a small group. And I like doing groups of 2, so speaking in a pair. And I'll notice, making sure that people are engaged at the level of the pair. And one thing I think is really important for me as an educator is I actually think feeling a little bit of discomfort is okay and indeed a good thing. You just don't want to feel so much that it's crippling and that it's preventing you from learning. And so I like talking to students one-on-one about what is their level of discomfort really. Is it a little bit and it sucks, but we can sit with it and feel it and participate anyway? Or is it really crippling and preventing you from actually being able to listen and learn? And so for every person, it's going to be different, and it might be different on any given day. And so if participating is going to make you in a space where you're so uncomfortable you can't learn, then I'd rather you be, not participate orally in that particular day. But if you're just a little uncomfortable and it stresses you out, I think that's okay. Because I think, especially in the law school context, very, very few lawyers are going to be in a career where you never have to speak, even people that aren't litigators. You could be a transactional lawyer or a lawyer that really just works with paperwork, but you're going to have team meetings with your colleagues. You're going to have to, discuss with your supervisor what your findings are. And that might be stressful. And I think it's good practice to report your findings and be able to be comfortable enough, even if you feel a little bit of discomfort, to be able to speak your findings and your opinions in a group setting. So anyway, I think hopefully that's helpful. I like working with students where they're at, making sure that they feel safe, but pushing them a little bit into a space of discomfort as long as it's not crippling.
That's great. I think encouraging students to get out of their comfort zone in a safe space is definitely a positive thing as we students work on going from the educational space into the real world. So that's great to hear how you work on incorporating that.
And then
So-
if I can
Oh, yes,
provide
please.
just a few suggestions for professors to help facilitate, to help bring Shire students into the fold. I see Amanda wrote in the chat actually something that I was going to suggest, which is you can offer students to communicate with professors, for example, by email outside of the classroom. So if you're doing a class discussion, you could say, hey, could you, anybody can feel free to send an article to the professor. And then the professor can then bring it up in class, or as Amanda suggests in the chat, asks if she can call on the student. And then another possibility is to have an online forum, and especially I think there's certain ways to make it anonymous, which might further encourage students who might have a provocative idea, but they're a little bit afraid to like attach their name to it, but they still want to present it and might provoke a discussion, provoke in a good way online. That's another possibility with an online forum. So having students, send professors material ahead of class, or post online and perhaps an anonymous fashion might encourage shy students as well.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, and really great suggestion in the chat. Thanks for calling that out, and thanks for sharing it, Amanda.
So we've talked a lot about classroom policies and what policies professors may incorporate into their syllabus, but once your syllabus is complete, those classroom policies then have to be implemented. So I'd like to talk a bit about best practices for implementing those classroom policies. So my question here is, what are the best ways that you ensure your students review and understand the classroom policies? And Michael, for you, perhaps you can share some of the best methods that professors have used for you to ensure that you understand what's in the syllabus.
I mean, I can take the lead on this. I think post the syllabus as early as possible. Once the semester gets rolling, students have a bunch of other responsibilities, and I find that I read syllabi that are in more in depth if they're posted maybe a week or two in advance of the semester, really as early as possible. Because at that point, you're trying to prepare for the upcoming semester. You're looking and I've had classes where professors don't post the syllabus until the night before, and I've had classes where professors post the syllabus weeks in advance. I feel much more prepared for the classes where the syllabus is available ahead of time. And then I believe at GW, we have a requirement to include certain school-wide policies at the top of the syllabus. So I wouldn't go over those again in class. I think students have been exposed to those already, unless it's a 1L class, maybe for 2L and 3L classes, just sort of thinking long, or animal L classes, which are for 2Ls and 3Ls. You're aware of the standard GW policies unless something has changed. So there's, maybe focus more on policies that are unique to the class that you're teaching, rather than sort of the school's boilerplate.
Josh, I don't know if you have anything else to say.
No, not particularly. I would echo all of that. I think the most I could add really is I think my syllabus is pretty consistent with the typical syllabus a 2L or 3L would see in terms of what the expectations are as to attendance and participation. I think if there's anything that might be a little different or unique in your course versus most upper level law school courses, that can be highlighted in some way, bolded, underlined, italicized, all of them. And I do at the start of the semester go over sort of the big picture expectations in the course as well, just to reiterate what's in the syllabus, but nothing to add beyond that.
The only other thing I would add is something that I think maybe lends itself more maybe to a 1L course. It really depends what kind of course you're teaching. Maybe if it's an undergraduate course, or if you're lucky enough to teach a required class that actually is involving animals, that would be amazing if there was such a class. But in my first year required class, we have course policies, and some of them are really important they're all really important, but some of them it's important that students know, like you can only submit things this many days late, or else the paper will become a 0, or you might fail, or things like that. So we actually create a Google form that highlights some of the most critical that might affect their ability to pass the class, or get a particular grade or what have you. And I identify I link to the policies, which is a Google Doc, but then I sort of highlight the ones that are particularly critical that they understand, and I'll blurb those out, and I have them initial them and then sign and certify the whole thing that they've read them and understood them. And then I actually go over them in class and ask them if they have any questions. So I want to make sure they have them in writing, they have a chance to discuss them with me orally, and I highlight the really critical ones in a Google Doc that they have identified. So then there's no like, oh, I didn't know that I couldn't submit it the 4th day late, or else I'm failing the class. I want to make sure I've really called that to their attention.
Thank you. I see we have about 12 minutes left, so I will pause here just in case anyone has some questions that they would like to ask. Okay, well, I can move on with my questions. If anything comes up, please feel free to raise your hand or drop something in the chat. So I'd like to recognize that this is a webinar for adjunct professors, and adjunct professors can sometimes not always feel the most supported. They're not always on the inside of the administration, and they might not always know what classroom policies their school has or what resources they can utilize for classroom policies. So do you have any recommendations on how adjuncts can best find those policies?
Josh, how did you find them?
I may be missing some, but as far as I know, they were all emailed to me in bold, underlined, italicized, highlighted. And then I think I got reminder emails. So again, there may be policies I don't know of, but I think that as far as GW goes, and I can only speak to GW since that's where I teach and have taught, I think they were all pretty clearly stated to me. And Dean Hessler's been good about also forwarding me emails, sending me emails to make sure that I've had the opportunity to review them and familiarize myself with those policies. But again, as far as I know, that was all the same expectations that I have of my students in reading the syllabus and understanding those policies. All of those policies were written out for me. As far as resources, again, I might not know of some of the resources, but to the extent that they exist and I've been made aware of them, I think those were communicated in the same form.
So I've never been an adjunct professor, but I've been a visiting professor, one at a school in Australia and one at a school in Sweden. And so I also was like dropped in as like a unfamiliar person and had to navigate this. And I see that Dean Hessler is explaining that GW is particularly good. At my other schools in other places where I taught as a visitor, I had to have a gut instinct of what I knew I didn't know. And like Josh said, well, maybe there's a resource I don't know that I don't know about because you don't know about it, right? But I think that you should figure out, who is the team of people that hired you. There's usually a senior associate dean or some dean for adjunct faculty, and figure out if there's also any full-time faculty that's teaching either other animal classes or just in general are people that you see as an ally, and then see if you can really make those people your allies. And don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. As somebody that's an administrator and I supervise a lot of other faculty, including I have supervised 45 adjunct faculty at any given time. I love getting I would rather get dozens of emails a day with small, seemingly stupid questions, of which there are none, than for the person to feel that they just have to figure it out on their own because they don't want to bother Iselin. I would much rather somebody bother me and ask me, and for me to point them in the direction of something where I think, that was kind of obvious. You could have Googled GW Law Library and found out the address of the library. But if you want to email me and ask, I will point you in that right direction. So I think some of it is just being willing to ask for help and ask for guidance. And people are going to be happy to bring you into the fold because they want you to succeed. In my experience, people are really excited for you to be there. And if they haven't answered your questions, it's because they already know where the library is, or they know where the copier is, or whatever it is you're trying to figure out. They know what the class policies are. And so they haven't thought to tell you just because it's not on their mind. But as soon as you ask the question, I think they'll be excited to share with you. That's been my experience.
Thank you. So for schools like GW that do have access to resources on classroom policies, are you able as a professor to make adjustments to those policies? And if so, to what extent can you make adjustments?
So I think, and Professor Gamber, I think, could speak more to this than I can, but I think it depends on what the policy is, right? So there's going to be usually a floor or a ceiling on a given policy, and you can't go below the floor or above the ceiling. But sometimes you have range within. So Professor Gambert spoke, for example, about the attendance policy. So you could have a floor of you can't miss, generally speaking, more than 80%, or you have to attend at least 80% of the classes over the course of a semester, but you could personally require a 90% attendance rate or something like that. But yeah, I think it's very depends on this policy. Obviously, you can't say in my class you can discriminate. So for your school's anti-discrimination policy, for example. So it just depends.
I don't have anything else to add. I agree with that.
Well, I'll pause here again with 6 minutes left in case we have any questions from any of the participants.
I just want to jump in and thank our adjuncts at GW. I've had a lot of classes with adjuncts, and we're lucky to be in the DC area where we have a lot of practicing attorneys like Professor Leugman, who practice law during the day and then come over to GW after work and teach. And it's really cool to get a perspective that's sort of outside of academia on what it's like to be in this field day to day. So thank you for making the time to come teach students.
Yes, absolutely. I second that.
I just
Okay.
want to say, I just want to say that I've been teaching since 2009, and I'm a full-time professor. But on my 1L program, we have 4 adjunct professors teaching in it, and not a week goes by where one of my adjunct professors, who has a day job being a lawyer, doesn't share an idea that they have for the classroom that I don't think is brilliant and that I don't borrow some aspect of, if not whole cloth. So it's so exciting seeing how adjunct faculty bring the real world into their teaching. And it's a gift when they share it with those of us that are trapped in academia full time. So to the adjuncts watching this, you have such a tremendous gift that you're giving the students, but also to your colleagues. So if you are somebody that has the ability to communicate with other colleagues at your institution teaching classes that might overlap, share some of your ideas with them, because they will be really refreshing and innovative and exciting. So yes, I echo what Michelle said, and thank you for all the innovation and creativity that you're bringing into your classes.
Finally, can I thank the understanding for today's discussion? I feel that my voice was heard, and especially on behalf of students and faculty that have experienced chronic illnesses. If it's not to any surprise, every time I go to the doctor and I ask for a doctor's note, they laugh when I say I'm in law school, and they say that's the only type of student that they ever get so many questions and paranoia about having a doctor's note from is their law students. So thank you for faculty for understanding. It's super beneficial and puts us at ease and helps calm the issues we're already dealing with and combating on a daily basis. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's a really critical one, and I really hope a lot more focus is placed on it in legal education. So thank you for being here.
Well, like we said at the beginning, these webinars are intended to be a source of community, a source of resources. So I'm really happy that we were able to exemplify that a little bit today and start these important conversations, and hopefully continue them as we continue to network and make connections and move these important topics forward. So with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really hope that you found this discussion informative and helpful. As a reminder, we will have another webinar next month on March 12th, and that will be discussing incorporating and managing AI in the classroom. And we certainly hope to see you there as well. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.